It's hot takes time, and boy, are there a lot. Marvel Snap has the best economy and gameplay it's ever had. People still complaining more than enjoying it, are burnt out, and should take a break. I think this is a really interesting take because, on the one hand, I do think that Marvel Snap, since, let's say, about the Kid Omega thing, has gotten consistently better. But I do think that handling has demonstrated that they still do not necessarily have the trust of their audience. And I think it's sort of hard to use audience trust as sort of an objective metric of anything. But I do think that Marvel Snap players and Marvel Snap developers have different goals in terms of what they want to interact with. And my thought process has always been that for the most part, those goals are sort of diametrically opposed. The people who make the game at some point want to make as much money from the game, which means they want you to spend more on the game. And the people who play the game don't want to spend as much on the game. They want more things for less money, whereas the people who make the game want to sell you less things for more money, right? Or, as the case may be, more things for more money. I think the economy of Marvel Snap has gotten better, but it hasn't gotten better by the amount people expected it to get better. And you see a lot of this in the context of, like, they switched to Snap Packs, which is objectively an upgrade, but then they started making more cards, so it stretched your upgraded resources more. And so something that could have been, like, let's say, a 30% upgrade, collections got 30% easier to complete, 50% easier to complete, whatever that is, instead ended up being a 10% upgrade. And you don't really feel it that much. And I think that is largely what people speak to when they talk about this kind of stuff, right? Like, I agree that people can be burned out, but I also think that there is a tendency in the community to sort of look at something and feel as though that it's not as good as it could have been. And I think that largely, this is, to me, a consequence of Marvel Snap's release system, because you just don't see this in other games to the same level. And I think that having, like, a new card a week, an economy of creators who, to my mind, are, I wouldn't say overly hype on those new cards, but, like, if you look at my video on Jocasta, who is, like, I think a pretty good card, it was going through a bunch of decks and then talking about why I didn't think they were good, and I think that's kind of out of the norm for creators. And so I think there's this sort of inherent FOMO attached to the marketing model, the distribution of cards model, that is much more acute in an individual instance than in any other card game. And I think that's sort of why these feelings are so big and so strong. And so I don't know if it's a solvable problem. I do think that this is a correct take, but I don't love that it places the blame on the people having the feelings, because I think that it is a combination of that and a sort of systemic loss of trust and a general feeling of getting screwed over. And I do think that that is a realistic feeling to have just about the world at large, right? Like, I think it's sort of a microcosm of big feelings that people have about systems that are really impactful, like the government and healthcare and things like that. And I would encourage people to get involved in activism along those lines, I think, much more than I would encourage people to get involved in activism along these. But I think it's probably a lot easier to get a dub yelling about how bad second dinner is than it is to convince people that you need to have healthcare, right? Like, just, full disclosure, I probably won't have healthcare next year if they don't solve what's going on right now. I don't want to think about that, so I think about video games instead. Players hyper-focus new cards. 3 of the 4 gauntlet-winning decks did not contain cards released within a few months leading up to their respective tournaments. I think this is tied into the conversation that I just, was talking about there, which is, I think the game is designed so that you hyper-focus new cards. So I don't really think you can blame players for hyper-focusing new cards. Like, as much as you want to say, like, something like, okay, well, if players didn't hyper-focus on getting the new cards, and if they didn't hyper-focus on having every card, well, then things would be a lot more okay for those players. And it's like, yeah, but also the monetization model is designed to create those feelings. So I find it hard to believe that you can blame the players for having the feelings that the monetization model wants them to have in order to incentivize purchases. You kind of have to place that on the model, or at least accept that it's going to happen, even if a smart player will opt out of feeling like that. I'm a pretty smart guy. I haven't opted out of feeling angry every time someone emotes me after they beat me. It's totally not adding value to my life, but it is a feeling that I have. It's not a rational thing. And I think you can, make whatever pronouncements you want about how people feel. I don't think you can be like, it's your fault for doing that when, people are being mean about it with emotes, or the system is set up to make you feel this FOMO stuff. I just don't like that it puts the onus on the people in the system rather than the designers of the system, right? And maybe you can meet in the middle somewhere, but I do think that generally I tend towards systemic analysis of these issues. I want Snap to make a DC crossover season purely to see how Snap's discourse around something like that compares to the amount of insane takes Universes Beyond has spawned in Magic the Gathering. So for those unaware, this is largely, I think, in reaction to the most recent Magic the Gathering Secret Lair, which is Dwight Schrute from The Office, which I think just sort of crosses a whole lot of does this feel like Magic the Gathering lines for a lot of people. So there's been a lot of just various discourse about that kind of stuff. I actually just don't think that would happen in Marvel Snap. I think that Marvel Snap is already so aware of what it is as like a slop property. Like, I read comics and I like comics. That's a new thing for me, but a lot of them are just slop. Like, I think you ask any fan of Spider-Man, do you think the current Spider-Man run is slop? And you go back probably 2 decades and they'll all be saying yes. Like, it is notable to which the degree that, like, this is a medium that is willing to engage in that. And even comics I would describe to some degree as slop. Like, for example, DC example, I've been reading Absolute Batman recently. My take on Absolute Batman is that it's absolutely slop. I love it. It's so absurdly over the top and grimdark that it loops back around to being entertaining and awesome and cool. But like, it starts with tactical operator Alfred. How is that not? Like, it's a whole thing, right? Like, I think that comics are so willing to just roll around in the slop that they are. They know that they're a fan base of, not sophisticated adult consumers a lot of the time. And so when you get something like an Immortal Hulk or whatever, that's what makes it stand out, is that it is a more adult oriented thing. But like, I think that the comics, like to crib an Alan Moore line, right? Like, it's sort of a fundamentally juvenile enterprise. And a lot of the best writers recognize that, right? Like, that is fine. And so I'm someone who likes comics, but if someone was like, you're reading slop, I'd be like, yeah. Like, I just don't think that I have the same reverence for the source material as Magic players do for Magic as a source material. And I don't think that it would even be bad if they did crossovers. I don't think they're gonna do crossovers, but I kind of think that, like, as much as the Marvel Snap community is bad about a bunch of stuff, I don't think anyone would be complaining about it beyond, like, I don't know. I think there's like a level of like crossover that they would get to where it's like pretty stupid. Like, I don't think they could do Dwight Schrute, but they could do DC. Like, they could do that pretty easily. And they could do like pretty much anything in that sort of, like, if it's marketed to 13-year-old boys, I am pretty sure they could put it in this game. Like, that's just basically where I'm at on this. Like, I don't think there's nearly the culture buildup that they have in Magic that, like, would be against that. Marvel Snap needs an interactive pet or interactive item to click or tap as you wait. Magic and Hearthstone did this day one. Hearthstone, famously, most recently did their version of Kid Omega, except it was a pet. And it was $158. So, like, don't give the Marvel Snap team any ideas. But also, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be like a thing that would be a bad idea objectively. It's just like one of those things where as soon as you make it, people will look at the price tag and they'll be like, I can't believe you're asking this price. And instead of saying, because you're asking this price, I'm going to opt out of it, they'll say, because you're asking this price, you're a greedy POS who doesn't deserve anything, and I'm going to yell about it for 10 months, right? And I think that that's probably just a losing thing to opt into, if I had to guess. I don't know that I would want the VFX team working on this, though. Like, that's sort of what I would say. I think the VFX team and the QA team are two of probably the more overworked teams in Snap based on my, like, noticing things, is what I would say. And so I don't think I want them working on anything other than, will this upcoming card crash the game when we put VFX on it? Because I think that's a common enough thing that I want their energies focused there, and I would hate to see people taken off of that beat to go make a cash-in pet. I do think it's the kind of thing that Marvel Snap naturally doesn't need as much of, because there just is less time waiting in Marvel Snap than there is in those games where your opponent gets to take a full turn and you have to sit there and look at them. So I think it would be the kind of thing that I would push pretty far down the list of, like, these are my priorities. The snap and retreat mechanics are detracting from a positive gaming experience. I often spend 5 turns building up my big pop-off combo, and if I snap, my opponent retreats before I get to see the end result, leaving me dissatisfied even though I won. I think it's not the snap mechanic that's doing that, it's the retreat mechanic. And I think that I've been thinking about this a lot recently in the context of Jocasta, which is like this very similar to discard, a sort of on-board combo. Like, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay when your opponent has like Jocasta, Omega Sentinel, Prodigy, the Jocasta in the same lane? Just going to let them Death Star you? No, you're either going to leave or you're going to do something that beats their Death Star combo, right? And that puts onboard combo decks in a situation that is not advantageous and makes combo decks want to be decks that are not on the board until the final turn of the game. And I think that that is a dynamic that you're just going to have to live with in Marvel Snap because of Snap and Retreat, but especially Retreat. And I think it's also why you see so much like discounting as an aspect of combo decks, because if it's not on the board, players don't recognize it as viscerally. People cope stay into Mr. Negative all the time. Nobody is cope staying into something that they can literally see on the board. Even though they can see the Mr. Negative, you might not have drawn the right stuff. The only times people are like really always retreating against the negative is like, you know, Negative Jane, right? Then they know they're dead. But a lot of the rest of the time, you will get cope stays out of that just because of the natural difference, even though there like functionally isn't much of one, of I see the combo versus I don't see the combo. And I do think that's notable. It does mean that they can put more power into the decks where the combo is visible, or it should. One thing that I've noticed, though, is over time, Marvel Snap players haven't really developed the instinct to retreat. And that's even worse, because you remember when Red Hulk came out, it was like, oh, well, we balanced this card around, like, people are going to retreat. They're not going to, like, stick around to lose to the Red Hulk. And that just wasn't true. People stuck around to lose to the Red Hulk all the time. And so that is something that is notable to me, is that players don't actually avail themselves of the retreat button a lot below like infinite a lot of the time. Like, it's just not a very common thing. People don't want to do it. They want to do their combo, etc. And so I think that if you're looking at the snap and retreat mechanic, the one that's causing the problems is largely retreat. I wouldn't want to remove it. I love it. It's a very good skill. Like, it is where a lot of the skill of the game is. But I do think that if you're a game designer, you look at this and you say, how do we make it more fun for players to put together onboard combos? And I don't think the answer is take away retreat, but there is maybe an answer there. Cerebro is not a healthy design at +3 power. It's a frustrating design to have a deck have almost zero ability to pivot except for one card, or just be auto dead to certain cards and locations, which makes the deck so bad to play. I agree with this. I also love the person asking it being Jay Walla, the Cerebro gamer. I will say this. I think that this is a true take. I don't like Cerebro. I don't think it's good to be the deck that exists in the game. It's basically a deck that occupies the hella space where it's like, if you're playing a normal deck, sorry, I'm taller than you. You must be this tall to ride. But it makes up for that by just sort of randomly losing 30% of its games, which is just like, I don't think that's the, like, is that creating good feelings for anybody? If they draw the Cerebro and you get stat checked, you feel stupid. If they don't draw the Cerebro, they feel stupid. If a location pops up, someone snaps. Okay, awesome. Like, it's a very, like, I find the experience of playing against it pretty one note. But like, it is, I do think that, okay, in as much as I have just gone on a diatribe here, I do have a soft spot for Cerebro specifically because it was such a gag card for so long that it's kind of funny that it's good. It's not necessarily like a card that if I come back here in a year, I'll be happy to see as the same card that it is now. But it's not like a card that I feel an immediate desire to be like, we've got to get rid of this. Because it's fulfilling a metagame role. And like, yeah, it kind of sucks, but something's probably going to fill that role anyway. And so constantly swapping out what's filling that role doesn't really feel like an incredibly profitable thing to me if the thing that's filling that role is cool. What I do think is a lot of the time the deck that fills that role is a deck where like 95% of the work is done in deck building. And it's like, oh, cool, here's this cool puzzle for you to play with. But there's not actually a cool puzzle there anymore. You just Google best Cerebro deck or best Hella deck or whatever, best Mr. Negative deck. And then you go play that. And there's no deck building puzzle to be had. There's no like, and there's less even room for self-expression, I would argue, because like what is actually good with this is so much more set in stone because there just aren't very many cards that actually compete for slots, right? And so they're like, it's just very clear what good versions of the deck are. And I think that's, if you have any issue with these kind of decks, that would be a notable one for me, is that like you look at these decks that are like, how do you like the question the card is asking you is like, how do you optimize me? What do you do for me? And there's just a very limited pool of cards with which to do it. I think that would be the larger issue for me. Mbaku is underrated and probably the best designed card, especially under Arishem context. He may make your deck slightly worse, but it is completely one-sided information that can be controlled, and 2 points can often turn the tides more than expected. Okay, so the problem is when you're playing an Arishem deck, you want your cards that you put in the deck to matter. And that's because you're drawing less of them. So when you draw one of them, it needs to be a big, important, swingy card. And that is largely why Mbaku doesn't make sense in an Arishem context, unless you randomly generate him in case he's pretty cool. In a normal context, Mbaku is a very interesting card because he's not as bad as you might think that he is, but he's also not good enough for people to play him and learn that he's not as bad as you might think that he is. It's sort of like a card going from like a D to a C, where the baseline for being a card you want to put in your deck is a B. It's like, yeah, he's still below the baseline, but he's slightly less below the baseline than you think. No one's going to like go devote the time to do that unless their name is Butt, right? And so this is a card that is interesting, but largely suffers from a couple of things. The first of which is, and probably the most important of which is, one drops just sort of fundamentally need to be really impactful or they're not very good. Like you look at the one drops that are seeing play right now, Sunspot can be like 10 million power. You look at Hydra Bob, it's a 1/4. That kind of stuff is just so much bigger than a 1/2 that if you are playing a 1/2 and they are playing a 1/4, that's the difference, right? Like Mbaku coming out of the deck for free, okay, but in the games where you play Mbaku, he's making up for that difference. And Mbaku's only coming out of the deck 25% of the time. The other 75% of the time, he's in your hand, and you're putting him on the board, and you're losing that 2 power compared to the Hydra Bob you could have been running. And I think that's the other thing that you run into with this guy, where it's like, it's just kind of hard to make that math make sense. The largest problem in Marvel Snap isn't card acquisition or balance, it's their support team. I think it's still probably card acquisition, but I will say some slops to the support team on this one in my humble perspective, because what this is most likely referencing is due to what seems to be a bug, they had bad alliance rewards for this week, and someone was like, hey, support, what's going on here? And got what really looks like an AI answer. No offense if it's not, but it did look like one to me. That was talking about how like, oh, this was intentional. Oh, they meant to do this. And that gave everyone the impression that it was intentional. And then, within like 12 hours of that post going viral, probably 24 hours of people noticing the alliance reward thing, Griffin, the community manager, was like, oh, I dug into this. It was totally accidental, and we're giving everyone all the rewards. And this feels like it happens pretty consistently with the support team, where like, whenever there is a thing going on, someone will be like, I should message support about this. And support will always be wrong. Like, whatever you ask them, whenever they are asked to comment on, is it intentional that X change happened to the economy? Every single time, they'll be like, yes, we did that on purpose. And every single time, within like 24 hours, the community team will be like, no, we didn't do that on purpose. It's a bug and we're compensating you. And it happens a lot. And I don't know how much of this is selection bias, right? Obviously, if someone asked and got a different answer during the same period of time, maybe I wouldn't have seen that. But it does come up enough where it's like, oh, okay, consistently what happens in any sort of mildly controversial situation is support puts them underwater. And I don't really know what you would do about that because, I mean, it's probably just someone trying to do their job, right? Like, when you are in a customer support situation, what you do is you say, I understand your problem. I have escalated it to the proper team. And I don't think it's unreasonable for someone working there to be assumed that like whatever changes were made were purposeful, right? Or to not understand the context of a question like that being there are 500 really mad people in the official Discord who will like be really mad about this forever if you give the wrong answer. It's normal to make mistakes at your job, I think. And I have a little bit of empathy for that because I make mistakes at my job all the time. I just like, it is notable to me how often this happens where like there will be some controversy and there will be a screenshot of someone asking support about like a change to the economy. I just think people should know never to do that. They're not going to have the right answer. There is like, even if it was an intentional change, they wouldn't know. Support just would not know. There is absolutely no way that they would know any of this stuff. And so I don't think it's support's problem. I think it's more just like people are looking for answers and they turn to like the place that has been the most consistently wrong about those answers, support. And then they're like, this proves what I already wanted to think, which is that second dinner is evil and trying to screw me. And yeah, I think, you know, maybe it's not a good enough answer to be like, wait for Griffin to answer your question, but it is the place you're going to get the actual answer to your question. I don't think it's a hot take, just obvious thing to expect. Introduce more filters to the card. Affliction, End of Turn, Galactus, Silver Surfer, Disruption, Bounce, Toxic, etc. I mean, I don't know about all of those, but yeah, they should absolutely do that. Not even a question in my mind. Afflict would be a great one. End of Turn would be a great one. All that stuff. Elites. I love that. They should absolutely do that. I'm a big fan of it. Bounce might be a little bit harder because you'd search and it would just be like 3 cards, Toxin, Falcon, Beast. But you know, that neither here nor there. I think that basically they should absolutely do this, and I put it on here basically to say they should absolutely do this. People love to dunk on SD, but couldn't handle anywhere near that level of scrutiny on their own jobs. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. There's definitely a thing in Marvel Snap where if they do something bad, it gets magnified 100x. If they do something good, it gets minimized 100x. And I think this Alliance thing is a good way to look at it, right? Like, they made a change to alliances that, according to them, was a bug. I know people don't necessarily believe that. I mostly do because they've messed up 5-week seasons before. And that is something that I like. I look at that and I'm like, yeah, okay, I believe that explanation. And if people don't believe that explanation, I don't know why you'd play a game that's staffed by people you just think are lying to you when they tell you stuff like this. But I generally think that it's entirely understandable to me to make a mistake like that. And then, you know, maybe I'm on vacation and suddenly the community manager is like, why did you do this? And you have to like figure out what the documentation was. One of the interesting things I saw, I think, was Griffin talking about how with Conquest, what happened was they were demoing some changes internally. Those demoed changes accidentally got added to a file that kept a log of things. And then 6 months later, they went back and they thought they had actually done those changes. And then they actually did those changes, assuming that was the normal thing to do. That's like exactly a thing that could happen in any organization. And it's just like, oh yeah, no, I totally understand that one. But it was a big deal at the time. And the reason I bring this stuff up is because everything feels like it's at a 10 anytime we lose something. And whenever we gain something, it doesn't feel like that's ever at a 10. And I bring this up to say, I totally forgot that they doubled the weekend quest rewards. I totally forgot that. And that is objectively better for players than losing out on whatever amount of credits they were getting in the alliances. It's objectively better. It affects more people. It is more stuff. But it was still the world's biggest deal when the Alliance thing happened. And there was no willingness for anyone to believe that it was an accident, which is emblematic of a lack of trust between the player base and the dev team, to me, and also just a generally negatively slanted discussion route, right? Nobody is like, yeah, it's okay, I trust them, they've been good to us. It's always immediately, they're trying to fuck us over. And I definitely noticed that. It is time to fully revert all high evolutionary changes. Yes, it is time. I don't think this is a hot take. It is absolutely time to revert all high evolutionary changes. High Evo Hulk should absolutely go back to being an ongoing that counts every turn you've skipped. High Evo Wasp should absolutely go back to +2. I will say, all high evolutionary nerfs, they should keep the ones where they buffed the card, for sure. But yeah, I think High Evo is an amazing card and should be, like, it is the card that is probably the most beneficial to new players to have be good, and I think it matters a ton, and I always get sad when I see it left behind. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest, and you have been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.